Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. So today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. I'm going to be breaking down episode 4, the Dragon Reborn for the Wheel of Time on Prime TV show. Now what I'm going to be doing is going over the hidden Easter eggs for us book readers, as well as some things that just general casual newcomers to the show and long-time book readers might have missed that were on screen when we were watching this episode. So to begin with, we're going to start off right at the beginning of the episode where we get our introduction to the war in Ghealdan. And we get our first glimpse of the King of Ghealdan alongside 2 other members of his army. Now, what I wanted to point out to you all is if you notice the shield on the right hand side of the king, this has a particular design to it. Now what you can see here is the 3 6-pointed stars of Ghealdan, which are the insignias for the nation. Now I thought that was a real nice touch for us book readers, but also of course for any newcomers to the series. This is something you wouldn't necessarily understand, and so I thought it would be a good idea to point it out to you all. Next we're going to go to a scene where Logain draws the 1 power for the first time in the show. Now, as you note in this close-up of the shot, we get to see the beginnings of Logain's channeling, but notice how at the time that he starts to channel, we still have the natural aura that we would see with the female Sedai who channeled the 1 power, and as of yet we haven't seen the taint. But that is all about to change, because as you see in the very next shot, 2 of the infantrymen throw spears towards Logain, and then we get the introduction of the taint, or the corruption as they're now calling it on the show, that now kind of engulfs and is sticking on top of the natural colouring of saidar here. And I think it was just a really cool way of them introducing the taint in a visible format for us all to see on the show. Right, next up is the second to final scene in the opening sequence, and this is once again when the King of Ghealdan is on his knees outside on kind of the courtyard area. What I wanted to note here is quite interesting, because Logain's clothing already has 2 dragons embroidered on either side of his kind of cloak or his gown, and I think this just further solidifies in his mind he is the prophesied Dragon Reborn, and of course he's had someone in the kingdom or outside of the kingdom create this design to further solidify that status that he has and holds himself with, which I thought was really nice to see. Then a little bit further on in the scene, we see what looks to be the manifestation that all male channelers are bound to succumb to, which is that of the madness as it's known in the Wheel of Time. Now this is manifested through 2 shadowy looking entities that are on either side of Logain's shoulder. Now to me, what was interesting for myself personally is I think there's a slight different scenario at play here, and I've done a video on that very subject with a card in the top right corner for all of you that may be interested in watching that particular video. I just want to note before leaving this scene how, if you notice the weaves that become the sort of manifestation of the madness, if we are to believe that, comes out from the shot of the camera and in towards Logain. Now, I don't know about you guys, but as we've always seen with all the Aes Sedai so far in the show, as well as with Logain a little bit earlier in, the weaves that he creates all come from within his body, and they kind of spiral out. Whereas this particular instance, it comes from off screen further away from Logain and enwraps itself around him, which is something I just wanted to point out, and that's something for you guys to have a think about as well. Right, up next we are moving away from that scene and now towards the Aes Sedai encampment, where they are now currently at, holding Logain under a shield. Now what I want to take note straight away is we get a look at the Green Ajah, and of course with that, as we all know, they have a tendency to have and bond more than one warder, and that is quite clearly showcased straight away here. Now something else I wanted you all to note And this is really cool in terms of the world building, just to showcase the world and the different nations that are in this world. You will notice how each of the warders in the scene right now have a very distinct look about them all, from their clothing to their complexion. So this obviously showcases what parts of the world they're from and the nations they're from as well, which I think is a real lovely touch in terms of the world building when it comes to the show, just to showcase how much attention to detail that they're being putting in, just in terms of the diversity on the show as well, which I thought was really cool to see. Now up next we have a shot of Lan. Now this isn't something kind of lore focused, but more just another sort of attention to detail moment that I noticed on one of my watches. And this is more to do with the team behind the show paying the attentions to the very small details, that they don't leave any stone unturned. Now, as you can see, he is now, carrying what I would describe as his kind of travel bag that he would, take out with Moiraine when they're out in the field. Now, if you notice, there's these two kind of metallic designs, which are kind of like, I'm guessing the buckles or the belts that will hold the bags in place. Now, interestingly enough, on the right-hand side of the top one, part of that design has been worn away. And so I think this is just one of those instances where they've paid a huge amount of attention to detail on even the smallest parts of the show. Moving a little bit further along, we get a shot of both Moiraine and Corrine entering into the cave where they are holding and currently shielding Logain. Now, what I wanted to note is, if you can see, there's these two sort of pillars or monuments or statues on either side of this image here, and what I wanted to point out is there's a lot of kind of writings that have been kind of carved into the stone face, which I thought was really interesting. Whether that's in the old tongue, I do not know, but maybe there's someone out there among you guys that are currently watching this video that might want to kind of see whether it is in the old tongue and then kind of try and decipher it. Okay, so then moving away from that, we have a scene where Moiraine is just about to shield Logain to take the burden away from Liandrin. Now, what was really interesting to note here is this is another instance where we see a particular set of hand movements that Moiraine uses to form the shield and then to kind of put that shield on Logain. And this is obviously the format or the form in terms of the hand movements that they will be using throughout the entirety of the show to showcase that they're, forming a shield on a fellow channeler, which I thought was a really cool instance to see in the moment. And as you can see, it's kind of signified by this ball in Moiraine's hands, and she kind of squeezes it into a smaller ball, and as she does that, the shield that is surrounding Logain kind of seeps in more towards his body and then kind of falls into place and surrounds his body to signify that the shield is now in place. And then what you'll note is Liandrin lets go of her shield, and we can see the threads or the weaves of that shield disintegrate off of Logain, which I thought was a really cool moment to kind of showcase when a weave has been, let go. Moving away from that, we now get a look at the warders, and in particular Lan and Stepin, where they are practicing their sword forms. Now, what I found really interesting in this sequence was the fact that both Lan and Stepin have a different preference in terms of their weapons. Lan has obviously his sword, whereas has his dual wielding axes. Now, what was really interesting to me throughout this scene was how it seems these sword forms can be transferable into other warders' choices of weapons. Now, obviously that wouldn't transfer over to, say, a bow and arrow or potentially spear, but it does to other sorts of weapons, which I found was really interesting to see. Up next, we have a shot of the Tinkers, or the traveling people. Now, what I wanted to note here was we actually finally see a lot more of the colours that we are accustomed to from the Tinkers in the book series. Now, in the last episode, there wasn't that kind of huge, vibrant range of colours, but within this fourth episode, we do get a lot more of that, which I thought was really nice to see. The next kind of sort of interesting Easter egg was the sequence with Rand, Matt and Tom, and this is in particular to do with the horse that Matt was on, kind of being very skittish around him. Now, this is alluded by Tom later on in the episode, that he mentions this in a sequence that I will be getting to in a moment as well, but he has the wrong assumption in play here, where he thought it was to do with him being the Dragon Reborn, or being able to be a male channeler, I should say. But whereas I believe the actual issue at play here is the horse can kind of feel the taint that the Shadar Logoth dagger has placed on Matt, and I feel that's what's made the horse become restless and very skittish around Matt. And I thought it was a really nice moment just to kind of introduce, just prior to the moment when Tom and Rand are having a conversation while Matt's asleep, and it's the introduction of the nephew of Tom with Owen. Moving away from that, we go now to a scene with Moiraine and Alanna having a little conversation. Now, what I loved about this scene is they touch upon the kind of drastic difference that the Green Hadja have when it comes to how they view their warders. It's not only done in a very tasteful manner, but it also leaves nothing to the imagination to the audience members that are watching the show in the kind of differences in how they view the warder. Whereas most of the other archers view the warders as just a simple bodyguard to protect them out in the open from Shadowspawn and anything that would try to harm them. The Greens have a very much more intimate and sexual relationship with their warders, and I think just the manner in which this scene was written and then obviously acted out was fantastic in showcasing that very different viewpoint that the Greens have on the warders. Following from that, we have a real interesting scene that is just after that, which still includes Moiraine and Alanna, but now it's focused in on Logain. And this is that first moment that we see in this episode where I believe he's just testing the shackles on his shield that, are surround him. And I think he just wants to get a feel for the power of the two Aes Sedai that are shielding him, but also just how much kind of effort he would have to put in to break free from their shield on him. And I think this is a moment that's very interesting to see now, knowing what happens later on, because I think it was a really nice sort of moment where we're seeing something at play that we didn't necessarily fully understand at that moment in the show and in the episode, but has a big payoff later on. Now we get to a real interesting scene that involves what I believe to be a moment of Rand's Ta'varenness at play. Now this is to do with when the small group make it to a farmhouse with the Gwynwalls. They are going to be, staying in the stables and not wanting to wake or unsettle the family that are living on the farm. But unfortunately for them in this moment, they are actually ambushed by the family living in the farm. And I believe if it wasn't for Rand intervening and then having his kind of Ta'varen rays, start to have a influence on the people that live at the farm, I think we would have had a different outcome in this scene here. Because now, if we think logically, why on earth would a group of people that have their own family and young children let in a group of strangers, all males at that, into their farmhouse for the night? Now, that is something I don't think anybody would do, and I think that was just something to think about with this scene. And I think that really showcases for a certainty, to me, in my mind at least, that Rand and his Ta'veren ways were finally starting to become evident in the show. Next, we have the scene where Mat is startled by the young child from the Grinnell household. Now, what was really lovely to me in this particular scene was really a couple of things. First of all, we have the foreshadowing and the sort of introduction to the show of. Now, this for me was so cool because obviously that's a nod to us book readers. Right, let's move away from that, and now we get to the conversation Tom has with Rand. And this is all centered upon Mat and what Tom has kind of viewed and watched happen around Mat. And he unfortunately has the wrong end of the stick that we know. He thinks it's all because of him being a male channeler, whereas in fact it's all to do thanks to the dagger he picked up from Shadar the Goth. But I thought this was a really cool way to introduce Tom's nephew Owen into the show, and obviously it kind of played in quite nicely with what is going on with Mat, because you can quite easily understand why Tom would think the way he is thinking, because he's already had the experience with his nephew Owen, and now he's seeing it firsthand in Mat, but for different reasons. And so I thought this was just a really nice scene to obviously see for all of us book readers that have seen and read these scenes in the book. And I just thought it was really cool in the way that they've actually introduced it and used it for the show, because it's a slight different use of these scenes and these characters that we're talking about. Next is a really cool scene that involves both Moiraine and Lan, and this showcases one of the effects that the bond has on an Aes Sedai in terms of what a warder's kind of condition will do for them. Now, obviously, at this point in time during the night, Lan has had a drink, and he obviously mentions how Moiraine gets very emotional whenever he drinks, and he says, "I should never have had a drink, you always get emotional." And I think that was just a really cool way of introducing, not only does a warder have benefits from becoming a warder and being bonded to an Aes Sedai, but also the Aes Sedai also will have kind of negative aspects of the bond placed on her, and that's through just kind of the condition her warder may be in. Now in this instance it's because Lan's had a bit of a drink, and so I would say Moiraine obviously is feeling the side effects of that, and it's made her kind of get a bit emotional about that, because as you all know, when people drink, we all kind of change and interact and become different people to certain degrees. Some of us are happy drunks, some of us are emotional drunks, some of us can be angry drunks, and it's just a really cool thing to see play out on the show. Now we have a really cool bit of foreshadowing, but also kind of building for future story arcs for certain characters, such as Aram. Now this is a scene that just follows the one with Perrin and Isla, and we get now a brief conversation between between Egwene and Aram, where he explains how when Tinkers become 20 years of age, they're allowed to leave their people and go out into the world and just get an experience and understanding of the world that's out there, and in case they perhaps want to choose that life, they can go and do so. And he explains how some become farmers, some become innkeepers, or some pick up these sort of swords. Now that's obviously a real, very much so, a foreshadowing moment that is a part of Aram's character, and I think they're just sowing the seeds for that moment when Aram will go and take that course of action and choose that way of life at a later point in the series, which I thought was really well written and nicely incorporated into those moments. Up next, we get now the scene with Matt inside the farmhouse, and it looks like when Rand and Tom enter into it, Matt has actually killed all the inhabitants. Now, we are led to believe, as the scene plays out, it wasn't actually Matt's doing, because as we can all see, Matt points straight to where the Fade was, and then that kind of alleviates our worry that Matt actually murdered them. And I thought what was also cool was in this particular scene was this could potentially be a sort of side effect of the kind of taint that the Shadowless Goth daggers placed upon Matt, because we've already seen, and it's been showcased now on a few occasions, what I believe to be Mashadar, which is now seeped into Matt's body, and I think a side effect of that could be the fact he can actually see shadow spawn a lot easier, or in particular a Fade in this instance, because as we can quite clearly see, both Tom and Rand, they have no clue that that Fade is in there, and it's only until Matt points it out do they realize what's about to happen. And then we get that kind of famous scene that would occur in Whitebridge in the Eye of the World book, but now it's played out in this farmhouse instead. But this one thing I want to note, and I thought it was really cool, was how the Fade moved within the shadows. 1 minute it's up on the landing, then the next it slivered its way down to the level where all the guys are. And I thought that was a really cool nod, just to the way they're described in the books and how they move around in the shadows. Next we have a moment when we know the Dragon Swarm that are following Logain have entered the campsite, and all the group kind of bundle together. Now, in that moment, a huge amount of arrows are flung into the air. Now, what was really cool for me just watching the scene was how instantaneously and selflessly Lan throws himself in front of Nynaeve to make sure if anyone was going to survive that moment, it would have been her. And he was happy to die for her in that moment, which I thought was just, oh! Anyway, yeah. And then finally we get the playoff from earlier where Logain at last breaks free of his shield, and I think he could have done that at any given moment. He chose to do so, and I think now that his army has finally arrived, he's decided now's the moment to act, and that's why he done it at this very moment. Next we get a look at Moiraine having a conversation with Logain. Now what I wanted to know and what I believe was going on, yes, Moiraine wanted to have a little bit of a conversation with him, but what was really at play here was the fact Moiraine was biding time for both her fellow sisters in the room there to regain consciousness, and so they could attack Logain. I think that was more along the lines of what Moiraine was going around doing in this scene. And now we are into the end game, the final few moments of the last scene or the sequence. Now what I thought was really cool in this scene with Liandrin and Moiraine was it's right after the moment Karine had been killed by Logain. Now we get our first look at what the kind of burning out of a channeler would look like when they kind of embrace too much of the one power that they can handle. And I thought it was actually showcased in a really cool way where Liandrin's face begins to get this kind of bright glow from the inside of her body. And I'm sure what would have happened is if she'd have continued along what she was doing, that would have ended up becoming more and more visual in terms of what it looked like on her face, and it would have kind of exploded. And that's what would have happened to her. Alright guys, well you've made it to the end of the video. I hope you found something among this video that you hadn't noticed yourself and that you've enjoyed it. Once again, thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you guys all in the next video.